So now I'm very excited to introduce Alastair McEwin AM. Alastair is a highly respected advocate for the rights of persons with disability and has an extensive experience across policy, law, and leadership in the disability sector. As a former Disability Discrimination Commissioner, one of the two Royal Commissioners with lived experience of disability, and a very passionate advocate for inclusive practices, Alastair's played a hugely pivotal role in promoting the elimination of restrictive practices in Australia. Personally, I'm having a bit of a fangirl moment, Professor McEwin, so just bear with me. We're very, very honoured to have Alastair here with us today to share his insights on the evidence that we have and the gaps that we need to address to eliminate restrictive practices entirely. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Alastair.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that lovely, warm and engaging introduction. Good afternoon. I'm Alastair McEwin. I want to firstly acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Bedegal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which the University of New South Wales Kensington campus is located. I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I also pay my respect to Aboriginal people who are part of this very important discussion today. Claire, thank you again. It's a real delight to be here because this is such an important topic. For those of you who are of low vision or blind, I am a middle-aged, white male. I have dark hair. I'm wearing a blue shirt and I'm wearing a dark jacket and I'm wearing glasses. I have a few grey hairs as well, but they're perhaps not as noticeable on the screen. As many of you know, I spent 4.5 years with 5 other commissioners on the Disability Royal Commission, the full title, of course, being the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability. It was a privilege to be asked to be a part of this alongside my disabled colleague, Professor Rhonda Galbally AC. We were the only 2 openly identifying disabled commissioners amongst 6 in total. And therein lay one challenge that we often have in the disability sector in being in the minority. That said, I'd like to think that the work we did and the work that many people did has contributed to the ongoing conversation, such as the one we're having today. In brief, the Royal Commission made 222 recommendations across a wide range of topics. I'm not going to go into detail through every recommendation about restrictive practices. What I will do for now is give you the headliner around those recommendations. The first one was around the need for legal framework, which actually mean that disabled people should not be subjected to restrictive practices. So that was our first recommendation. The second recommendation was for immediate action to stop restrictive practices in certain settings, such as education, health and mental health settings, and also against children and young people with disability. We made a recommendation about improving data collection and public reporting on the use of psychotropic medication. We made recommendations on strengthening the evidence base on reducing and eliminating restrictive practices, and of course that's what today's topic is all about. We also recommended that we need to improve the collection and reporting of data, and again that's related to the topic of today. We believed and recommended that there should be targets and performance indicators so that we can see that the elimination of restrictive practices is happening. And importantly, particularly for some of the commissioners, we recommended that all jurisdictions should amend or enact legislation to prohibit non-therapeutic procedures that result in the permanent sterilisation of people with disability. Now, I really want to say a very important thing. Many of you today made enormous contributions to the Royal Commission, and I want to acknowledge this because the greater the voices and the greater the contributions that we as a disability community made, it strengthens the evidence base. And it also means that it makes it harder for government and policy makers to ignore them. We have a history of having been ignored. I think we are getting in the room more and more. We've still got a long way to go. So this is why the Royal Commission is so important, in that you can't go any higher in Australia than a formal Royal Commission. So the weight and the strength of the stories and experiences and the information and the evidence that we got from so many people is vital to be able to say with stronger legitimacy, this is the problem and this is what needs to happen. So I want to say a huge thank you. The list is enormous, but we just start individually thanking people. We will be here for decades. So please know that the work we did, and I know in particular that for many of you it was traumatic and upsetting to have to retell your story. So I acknowledge your bravery. I acknowledge the importance of why you shared those stories with us. Fundamentally, the lived experience of disabled people and the barriers they experience was fundamental to how we made our recommendations and the findings that were attached to it. And I'll give you an example. I heard many private sessions with disabled people and in particular parents who talked to me about their experiences of trying to access mainstream education. Again and again and again, I heard the theme of parents try to enroll their child, disabled child, into the local primary school, local mainstream primary school. And again, they were prevented from doing so. So by listening to these accounts again and again, a clear theme emerged. Parents wanted their child to be in the mainstream setting, and yet the mainstream setting was excluding them, and they often had no choice other than a special school or a segregated educational setting. So that's an example for me that was very powerful in the Royal Commission, listening deeply to what we were hearing, taking a step back and reflecting, and then working out what were the major things that you can't ignore. And so for me and for Rhonda Galbally and Barbara Bennett in particular, that was a very important theme that drove us to provide the recommendations that we did ultimately in our report, or in the final report. We also made sure that disabled people could provide their information or evidence in whatever way suited their needs. We had submissions in artwork, we had submissions in Auslan, video recordings of Auslan. We also had people come to us and provide them over the phone, through email, through whatever mechanism worked for them. That was one method. And that's something that many researchers and many people are used to. What we were very conscious of was also knowing that many disabled people were in segregated settings, or in settings where they were either hard to reach, or, as I like to say, kept out of reach. And I think that that terminology is important. They are being kept out of reach by the system or by organisations who are preventing disabled people from expressing their views or having their say. A couple of examples. We work with some disability organisations to facilitate people in group homes to provide information through private sessions without necessarily those organisations or the group homes knowing that that was happening. Now, I'm not saying we did anything untoward. What I'm saying is that we created the pathway for a disabled person who may be shut away somewhere to be able to express or inform the Royal Commission of their views. So I want to say a huge shout out and acknowledge those advocates who worked really hard to address the barrier that segregated settings create. We also went into custodial settings, and we also made sure that we were alert to where other people might be. Of course, COVID and the pandemic restricted some of our activities. However, we made, I think, on reflection, a genuine attempt to break down some of the barriers that can take place when you're conducting an inquiry or research. And of course, we did research, and I want to say a huge thank you to those who also provided research and conducted research on behalf of the Royal Commission. And I believe that we did, wherever possible, an inclusive approach, a disability inclusive approach with that research. I also want to take the opportunity to provide some of my own personal reflections on the challenge that Rhonda and I had in the internal ableism that were taking place in the Royal Commission. And I'm not going to reveal anything that was said internally. However, if you look at the final report and see the different views that were expressed, I think it's fair to say that you can understand where I'm coming from in terms of the challenges in addressing the use of language and in addressing the ableism that is still very much part of society and in the systems and settings that we have in Australia. And one example is, and I'm going to quote from the Royal Commission report, and this is a direct quote, and I've just realised I didn't put the page number, and so I'm sorry, you're going to have to go and find this, and I've just seemed to have failed miserably at citation in my own report, but I know where it is, and I'm sure you can find it. Here's the direct quote. Commissioners Rhonda Galbally AC and Alastair McEwin AM consider behaviours of concern, so that's phrase, a pejorative expression and a social construct that implies the person with disability is at fault for their behaviour. Commissioner Galbally and McEwin instead prefer the expression behaviour seen as concerning. To these commissioners, this wording reflects the social and environmental factors that may contribute to the behaviour of a person with disability, including when this behaviour involves reaction, for example, to being in pain. Now, I want to make this very clear. I'm not citing this or quoting this just to bring attention to what I and Rhonda said and did. I want to illustrate that as an example of where we tried at every opportunity to challenge the language, to challenge the ableism, and to also highlight where we very strongly felt that it was important that this be put in the final report and not lost in the midst of time, getting in a draft line somewhere on the floor. So in summary, I want to provide you with some of my reflections on where to from here. I can see that we have hundreds of people in this workshop, and that's an amazing reflection of the commitment and the passion and the willingness that all of us have in terms of progressing what we need to do on the topic of restrictive practices. Let me be very clear. Restrictive practices against disabled people are a form of violation of human rights, and are recognised as such in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. So this conversation therefore needs to acknowledge this and focus our effort on how we eliminate restrictive practices, and what does the research tell us about how we can best achieve this. As I explained for how we did our work in the Royal Commission, we acknowledge that not everyone is able to click on a survey or come to the Royal Commission and provide information or evidence. Keep that in mind. Outreach is important. Think about the barriers of the people you are trying to talk to may be experiencing in their own lives. A group home is a perfect example, as I said earlier. The work you do also is an opportunity to influence the way we have conversation on a topic such as restrictive practices. So I gave you that quote from the Royal Commission as an example of how you too, in your own workplaces, your research centres, your university, government, the advocacy organisation, wherever you may be working, is where can you challenge long-held assumptions about language and long-held beliefs about disabled people? And that may be uncomfortable. Well, disabled people live with discomfort every day. So learn to live with that comfort if you find it challenging. And I know it's not easy, and I can tell you from personal experience, Rhonda and I had some very interesting conversations internally in the Royal Commission. It's been a real privilege to be part of this conversation. I was absolutely delighted and said yes within 30 seconds of getting the invitations. I want to thank Claire for her leadership. I also want to acknowledge Mary Sayes and Sue Tate, and I'm at the risk of excluding people by going into a list. I want you to know you all play an incredibly vital role in progressing this conversation. I appreciate the Minister's words. I think they are important, and I am pleased to see that she's committed to the National Disability Research Partnership, and I look forward to seeing all of you go from strength to strength, and I playing a small role in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor McEwin. Before I go into some remarks based on what you've said, I just want to let everybody know that we have a specific channel for Auslan Interpreter. So if you go on the More button at the bottom of your screen, you should see a small, like a globe symbol, and that's your interpretation channel. But reach out to the team if you don't, if you're struggling. So I've got a few things just came to mind. I want to just acknowledge your conversation around the behaviours of concern. In my house, we call them behaviours of protest because we feel that's what they are. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge and thank you for the fact that you raised the elephant in the room that's not often raised, which was about the internal ableism that you experienced and that most of us kind of on the outside but loosely connected saw. So thank you for raising that. And finally, I also just want to acknowledge both your work and the work of the Rider Commission team. As somebody who was locked behind the WA border, during COVID, I was very appreciative of the flexible and committed way in which the Commission team worked really hard to get the voices of folks here in WA heard, because you were not physically allowed to come here for a really long time. So just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. So of course, always going to thank you for your ongoing commitment to advancing the rights of folks with disability. And I hope that you know how much we all value you for that work. And I just also really appreciate your reflections on the gap and in the evidence and the need that we have for collective action. So thank you again so much for being with us today.